Alright, Avast mateys, and welcome back to Yar Thunder. Before we start off with the video, I want to give a quick shout out to everyone who left their feedback on the last video, on the Schnellboot S100. Now, unless we tried to do a little bit of a introduction of a character that she introduced before in Battlefield 1, named Hans. Hans is essentially a overly Germanized guy. Now, a couple of you guys did like the accent, most of you did not. So, in an effort to, well, not make everyone leave out of cringiness, we're going to keep today with my normal, just slightly German accent, alright? So, we are taking a look at the Elco PT-314. This is the only American boat we currently have available in the alpha / pre-beta / closed beta tests. The name convention is still very, very weird. Now, this thing has a crew of 15 people. It is equipped with 3 engines, which each drive 1 propeller, or is it ship screw? Not quite sure. But yes, I would say ship screw shafts, and it has a top speed of 77 km per hour. Now, this thing doesn't have much armor, sadly. It is quite lightly armored, only having around 7mm of armor all around, which maybe can stop some rifle caliber cartridges from long range, especially when angled, but mostly everything else is going to go straight through you, especially the 76mm HE shells from the Project 1124. But, thankfully, it more than compensates with the amount of firepower this thing carries. It carries a single 40mm Bofors cannon with 1000 rounds at its disposal. Sadly, I am not sure because the interface is very weird and you cannot select the ammo types for this thing. But if the 40mm cannon on the British boat is anything to go by, this thing only fires HEF shells, which only have about 3mm of penetration. As such, are only really useful for taking out the crew on the deck and not the ship itself. So keep it in mind when firing the 40mm cannon. Thankfully, to compensate for the lack of penetration, you do also get a 37mm M4 cannon, which is the same one as mounted on the, I think it's the P39s or P63s. And this thing can carry a total of 420 rounds, and it has the option to carry API rounds, which of course won't explode inside of the enemy boats, but will set things on fire and punch straight through the hull. You also get a single 20mm Oerlikon cannon with 420 rounds and 2 turrets mounted with 2 50 caliber Browning machine guns each, which also carries a total of 4000 rounds. Apart from the main armament, you also have 4 torpedo tubes, each carrying a single 571mm torpedo. Now, these are mostly one-shots when hitting the center section of an enemy boat, but I did have situations where I hit the tail section, and whilst doing massive damage and completely crippling the enemy boat, it did not take them down in one shot. Also, since you have so much stuff already on the deck, this boat does not carry any type of depth charges, so keep it in mind when you have enemies chasing down around you. Now, the 3 engines mounted on this thing are extremely powerful and actually make this thing, out of all the boats that we currently have available to be driven, to be, well, tested, one of the most maneuverable. This thing has insane acceleration going forwards, insane acceleration going backwards. You can do essentially drifts on the water, you can do quick change of maneuvers. Especially at long range, this is very useful in just going backwards and forwards, using those 40 and 37mm cannons to hit targets at long range, whilst they are going to have a hard time hitting you, since you are going to be moving around quite a bit. The top speed is also going to be very useful in getting into close range and using those torpedo tubes. This thing, I think, carries the most torpedoes that can be dropped at once out of any of the boats we currently have in the alpha test, which means that this thing is extremely effective at saturating an area with torpedoes and hitting multiple enemies at the same time, which is very, very good, especially given the power of torpedoes compared to the guns. Sadly, the torpedoes are a little bit sluggish, they are not the fastest ones around, and they also have a rather short range. I've had issues with myself dropping torpedoes on a stranded boat, for example, and the torpedo just despawning just a couple meters before reaching the enemy, which was rather underwhelming, let's just say that. Now, torpedoes can be fired either singly, as you can currently see, By the way, this is a little trick. The way you fire the torpedoes is whatever key you have them bound to. If you hold that key, you're going to see the lines of the individual torpedo launcher. So 4 lines in case of the Elco. The way you fire them is by hovering your mouse over one or more of those lines until they turn yellow. When they turn yellow, you can release the key you have set to your torpedoes, and that specific torpedo is going to fire. Now, in case of the Elco, you can fire each torpedo individually, depending on where you have your mouse hovering at, or you can even fire 2 at a time. If you have your mouse completely set forward, you're going to fire the 2 ones that are mounted directly 0 degrees to the front of your boat. If you hold to the left side, you can fire the 2 left torpedoes, which have a different angle in between the 2, which means that you can saturate the air a little bit more, have a little bit wider of a spread of the torpedoes, which can help in hitting targets more reliably, and still have the 2 torpedoes on the other side left over. So, in terms of torpedoes, this is one of the most versatile torpedo boats out there, giving you the option to fire single torpedoes with precision, as you have 2 launchers mounted on the front, and launch at 0 degrees towards your line of travel. Or you can saturate an area with 4 torpedoes, take out an entire team that's crossing around that island, stuff like that. And if the torpedoes don't do the job, you always have the guns. Now let's talk a little bit about the gun performance and the overall survivability of the Elco. As you can see in this match so far, I've tried to avoid going broadside, especially when you're going up against stuff like the Project 1124 with its big cannons, which will absolutely wreck you with their high explosive shells. It's a good idea to try and evade enemy fire as much as you can. This thing is small, this thing is light, this thing is fast. This thing is not well armored, however. Imagine this thing to be kind of like the Hellcat of the seas, if that makes any sense. Essentially you have to flank around, try and use the cover of the islands. If absolute need be, you can hit some targets long range with the 37mm gun, or even with the 40 if you can hit the deck reliably, but you're not going to sink ships very effectively that way. If you want to sink ships very effectively, you have to use the torpedoes. So what I like to do is exactly what I just said before. I use the cover of the islands, I try and weave in between them. In this game mode you can actually see the enemies from quite a bit far away. I'm not quite sure what the game mode is, actually someone asked it in the comments of the last video. It seems to be somewhat a mix of in between RB and arcade battles, in the sense that you don't get target lead markers, although we don't know if that's going to be a thing in boats just yet, given that it already does an automatic compensation for the distance in terms of height. Also, aircraft don't get bomb drop markers for the most part, except for the Russian one. The Russian one, the Su-2, for some reason does get the bombing crosshair, which is weird, because it makes it one of the most effective aircraft to take out in these battles. But yeah, it's somewhat in between arcade and realistic modes. It's highly experimental, of course. Do keep in mind that none of these stats are written in stone. This is a pre-alpha test for all effects and purposes, an alpha test, so to speak. The beta is, well, going to start when everyone is going to have access to it. At the moment this isn't even an issue where we can select boats at all. We have to just select the event, whichever nation we're playing, and then be forced to play those boats. So we cannot even drive the boats that were pre-ordered or anything like that. You're locked to those selections. Now, since I mentioned a couple of tips in the last video and the last video wasn't that enjoyable to watch, let me rephrase on how you effectively take down boats in the new Naval Forces expansion for War Thunder. Essentially, there are 2 things you have to keep in mind. This thing is not, this game mode is not like tanks, or at least not too much like tanks. Whereas in tanks, the most effective way to take down tanks was to kill all of the crew or kill most of the crew. In boats that isn't really all that effective, just given by the sheer amount of people that each boat can carry. This thing can carry 15 people, the Schnellboot of the Germans can carry up to 22 people. Killing all the crew is going to be hard to do. That being said, there are other things you can do. One of the easiest way, of course, is to hit the torpedo. Torpedoes are mostly one-shot kills. Same thing with the depth charges. You can give if you can get them correctly placed without taking too much damage. Do keep in mind that in order to place depth charges, you have to be very close to the enemy, which generally results in you taking a lot of damage in return. But the torpedoes definitely are the way to go. So, when is the best way to hit someone with a torpedo? Well, when they're not moving. Yes. Essentially, if you can remember where the engines are on the enemy boat, and especially if you can pay close attention to the top right corner where the hit camera is going to be, which also is continuous right now, so you can just see a continuous stream of bullets hitting your enemy. Try and go for the engines, and once these engines are disabled, you can go in close and drop a torpedo on them. Alternatively, if you don't have torpedoes, for example, if your boat doesn't have torpedoes but rather has big cannons, the main way to take down a boat is by damaging all of the hull. As said in the last video, the hull is divided into 3 sections. You have the front section, you have the middle section, and you have the back section. If you can manage to make all 3 of those sections black, the boat is going to be counted as destroyed. Alternatively, you can also set the enemy on fire. Now, there aren't any fire extinguishers on this, at least not as of yet, unlike as is the case with tanks. However, the crew does seem to be extinguishing fires by themselves after some time. It takes a little bit longer than it does take in tanks, and oftentimes you are going to be burning for quite a while, which can result in most of your crew dying, or even your ship burning down. But it does extinguish the fires by themselves. That being said, a fire is always going to cripple the enemy, especially if their engines are down. They are not going to be able to move. Essentially, a boat with a dead engine is just dead weight, really. It's going to be a target, a inviting target in the middle of the water, especially for aircraft dropping bombs, especially for the Beaufort or bow something that's dropping bombs. You're going to be a dead duck in the water, essentially. So, go for the hull. Go for the crew deck. By the way, this is something I have to really emphasize. Try and avoid taking damage if you can. There are no points where you can repair your boat. There are no points where you can replenish your crew. So try and go for the deck crew first. Try and disable all of the guns. Especially in the Elco, you have the 14mm Beaufort cannon, which is very effective at doing that, killing exposed crew with its high explosive fragmentation shells. And after that, you can worry about dropping torpedoes, dropping depth charges, or going and just surgically working over the hull with your guns. But this is it for today, and this has been the Elco PT boat. Give me your comments in the comment section down below. If you have driven this thing yet, what do you think of it? I think this is one of the most versatile boats currently in the alpha test, just for its nice balance between torpedoes, guns, and overall maneuverability. Albeit it doesn't have much crew and not much armor, but it just makes up for that with overwhelming firepower and mobility. And other than that, stay tuned for the next episode. Like this video if you did, subscribe if you're around here, and as always, my name's been MikeGoesBoom. Thanks for watching!
You can lift your head up to the sky, take a deeper breath and give it time. You can walk the path among the lines with your shattered frame of mind. Or instead you could always stay. We can wait right here and play until some